jua likichomoza, wananchi wanajua. Kwa macho yetu tumepaza sauti kubwa, kutazama na kuripoti ni jukumu letu. Katika vichochoro vya jiji hadi milima ya mbali mwa mbuga, tukitembea kwa upole, tukichunguza hali kwa niaba ya Kenya, tunavaa mshipi wa wajibu. Maoni yetu ni mwanga, kivuli cha haki. Katika kelele ya mchakato tunaleta utulivu. Sisi ni macho ya taifa, tumeunganisha mikono na sauti ya umoja. Tumejenga daraja kwa kupendekeza mabadiliko. Uchaguzi uwazi, kwa pamoja tustahili uhuru na haki kabisa.
Welcome to Darubini ya Uchaguzi podcast, where we dive deep into the stories, insights, and critical updates shaping democracy in Kenya and beyond. From voter voices to electoral reforms, this is your go-to source for all things elections, straight from the experts, activists, and insiders on the ground. Join us as we shine a light on transparency, integrity, and accountability in the democratic process. So, keep your ears tuned and your eyes on the elections with electoral.
Today we'll be discussing about misinformation and disinformation. First of all, when you look at the context of what misinformation is, it is when people actually receive information that is not credible, but it is not intended. But disinformation is information that is actually intended to cause harm. So when we look at the information landscape currently, especially to put it into context with the Gen Z demo in the June 25th, 2024 protest, we saw that there was a lot of need and clamor for information, especially in the political and governance space. So this led to a lot of youth seeking information on these particular topics, and there was very little information that was credible. So how that looked like is there was a lot of propaganda and a lot of satire when it came to approaching of information that was supposed to feed and capacity build the movement to prepare for what they had actually targeted. So today we'll be talking about how can you be able to analyze and fact check information and see that it is credible and it is worthwhile information in a digital age. And with me is my panel, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dennis Jongo, program assistant at ELOG and also a media monitor.
Hi everyone, my name is Paulina Gesa. I'm the media monitoring team lead at ELOG. Thank you, Karen, for having us.
Thank you. So today we're going to have a discussion on what are your thoughts specifically when it comes to misinformation and disinformation in context to the June 25th demos that we had on the Reject Finance Bill. So what role do you think the information that we had on the ground was played by mis or disinformation?
Maybe I'll just give a brief context. Our work on disinformation does not really or did not start with the Gen Z movement or the June 25th demonstrations. So just to give a brief background, media monitoring is a program at ELO whereby we look at not only social media, but also the mainstream media, which is TV, radio, and newspapers, to just check how are certain topics, and in our field, now that we're in the electoral and governance field, to just check how certain thematic areas are reported, when are they highly reported, and does mis and disinformation arise from the reporting of this thematic area? So, mis and disinformation, just as you mentioned before, misinformation is information that is not correct, but it is not intended to harm anyone. Disinformation, on the other hand, is information that is not correct, but it is intended to harm a certain group, a certain individual, a certain organization. So generally, disinformation is meant for harm. And ELOG, there are certain times that you'll see a surge in disinformation, and at certain times you just see disinformation will be there, but not very high. For instance, we had the 2022 elections and monitored both mainstream and online media. And, because this election is a very hot topic in the country, then it really, really had a lot of disinformation, and we documented that. We also did document disinformation after the elections, because after elections, we also have some activities that go on. And depending on what part of the electoral cycle you're in, you either see an increase or a decrease in disinformation. So fast forward to 2024, during the June 25th demonstrations. To also clarify, we did not just observe during the demo. We had started as early as March 2024 to just see what's going on social media, what are people interested in, what are people talking about, and as even if we look back when the financial bill was highly contested, then people didn't actually understand what the finance bill is, what it entails. It's just what they had from politicians. Then whatever they've had from politicians, they'll go online and incite others into saying a certain thing because of a certain politician said this and this. And then disinformation, let's say in that period, rose mostly because of insufficient information. If people have gaps in information, then they have to fill those gaps. And if there isn't available information to fill the gaps, then people will use disinformation to fill the gaps. And sometimes disinformation is more appealing to the mass than actually the truth. So the 25th demonstrations, we didn't just monitor, people have decided to go and demonstrate. But earlier before that, what led to people really start having these discussions and people saying, okay, this is not right, this should be done this way. And a few of the people had the real knowledge, a majority did not. So where a majority do not have information, then they have to substitute it with disinformation. I think I'm over explaining it, but
No, I actually think
I'm
you're okay. You're okay. I think one of the biggest things then I'm tempted to ask is we're talking about how we have a gap where if people don't actually have the information, then they substitute it to what is appealing. So I'd really like to now bring in Dennis into this discussion, and I'd like to know from your perspective, not even as someone who's working in ELOG, but as a Gen Z, what do you think was one of the biggest reasons that caused this whole season of misinformation and disinformation during the Reject the Finance Bill?
So as Pauline has very well explained, the difference between misinformation and disinformation. So this information is meant to actually cause harm. So during this protest, you find that the Gen Z trying to push our agenda, we go to the extremes, cooking up information, Actually, for me, as a media monitor in Elog, I used to monitor the digital space. That would be Twitter, X. So while I was monitoring, I would come across digital cards specifically meant to mislead. Information that was shared was meant to cause harm to maybe let's say a politician, right? So the impersonate that politician, even organizations. So maybe a press statement is doing rounds. So the actual press statement is it's not from the organization, but meant to mislead the public, right? So you find that the Gen Zs would go to these extremes to try and push their agenda, so that they can see change.
Okay, interesting. We also talked about how we are in a space currently where we're seeing a shift, if I may speak my mind, where people were previously relying on political figures to give them information, but now we're moving into a space where people are not relying. Do you think that statement in itself is entirely true, or to some extent bado ni kama tunaongojea wakubwa watupe information on these spaces, on the electoral processes, on the bills that they're lobbying for, like, and do you also think probably we can have change in terms of showing people that we do not need watu wakubwa wakuje watupe information, that as citizenry we can capacity build amongst ourselves and teach ourselves what entails this whole process?
Actually, I'm so excited for that question. I don't know why, but I think your statement is entirely true. Especially with this revolution, sort of, because do you remember when the Gen Zs, as much as we say they go to the extreme, the other positive extreme they went to is translating the finance bill into mother tongues, such that the person in the village who cannot read English or Swahili, they can still understand why they are saying no to such a finance bill. So I think in this age and era, I'm so happy that the citizenry no longer depend, not the, I'll say a majority of the citizenry no longer depend on the politicians for information. And we're in the age of technology, we're in the age of AI. Right now, we chat GPT. If I want to know something about what the Constitution says, I just need to go and key in the chat GPT. But I have a caveat to that statement. This only applies to the younger generation, the people who can access technology. But there is a set of citizens who live in the rural areas, who still believe in the communal setting, whereby if the chief says we are voting for so and so, the whole community will then go ahead and vote for that politician. So as much as we have this positive change towards access to information, we also have to remember, and it's just recently that the Gen Zs are now interested in the politics of the country and the governance of the country. But remember, in the prior years, the young people didn't either register, or if they registered, they didn't vote. So who will make the decision? The people, the older people, or the people who are registered and vote. So whoever the politician they put in the office, then that is the person you have to deal with. So in most of our electoral processes, I can say it is not being woke. You have to be woke and then make that decision to actually choose a leader who's going to bring change. But if not, then a certain group who are used to certain norms are still going to choose the leaders. And no matter what happens, no matter how much noise is made online, as long as it does not translate to physically putting in place the right leaders, then we are still going to complain about the same thing. Connecting that to disinformation is that online, we say that there's a lot of disinformation online, but there's also a lot of disinformation offline.
Yes.
If I go to the village, the politician knows, for instance, the internet connection is not that well, because let's be honest, the young people are moving to urban areas.
Yeah, that's true.
So the internet is better in the urban
Clearly.
areas. So the politicians are still politicians. What politicians rely on is strategy. If I know the young people have internet, but they're in the urban areas, then they utilize the people in the rural areas, the people who still believe in barazas, the people who still believe in the chief. And you see, for a politician to go, now this is where propaganda comes in. Politician will go and say, our people, it's time for us to kukula pia kukua kwa meza, you see?
Yeah.
That might not at all work with the Gen Z or the youth, but it does work in the villages. And these politicians do get elected in the villages. So as much as there's a lot of campaign online about the revolution, remember there's still this certain group that still should also be brought up to date. I'll still go back to the example of translating the constitution into native languages.
Yeah.
As much as the Gen Zs call themselves tribeless, remember there are parents and grandparents who can only understand that language.
Yeah.
So why not bring them into the revolution so that in the next election they don't vote how they're used to voting? Because just speaking about it online, it's fellow youths who are seeing it. It's not them who are seeing it. So a revolution, I think, is supposed to be inclusive. So why not translate these ills, societal ills? Why not tell them if our politicians comes to say this about a certain community, it's just propaganda. A politician coming to tell us it is our time to be on the table, it's just propaganda. It doesn't actually mean he's bringing the community on the table. He just wants to be elected to be on the table. So I think with disinformation, what we really encourage is knowledge sharing. The little that you know is something that somebody else does not know. So if you can share the little that you know, somebody else will know the little that you know, and then you will know the little that somebody else knows. And then you see when there is information all around, and then it's even harder for a politician to come and try to convince you with propaganda. They'll now have to bring the real agenda on the table, and you're either for it or not for it.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's very interesting that you're talking about how propaganda also comes into play on being a very big perpetrator on disinformation, where certain people actually use these platforms to kind of channel what is working for them and for the political system, but not really to like eradicate the already ongoing disinformation that is going on. So coming to a point where now we are also trying to link propaganda and satire. I think there's been a very big rise in satire, especially through meme culture, gifs, and jokes. I'd like to know, just from the perspective of a Gen Z and someone who's been working in that space, both in X and TikTok. Do you really think, Dennis, that it had a very big impact on how the movement was pushed and the narratives that we had during the Reject the Finance Bill movement?
Thank you for the question, Catherine. Yeah, I think it definitely did, because these are things that Gen Z revolve around, and it's a way to reach out to them. Once those cartoons, the memes, as you so put it, they're put out there, the Gen Z resonate more than more with that than the other generations. So, in terms of pushing a revolution or an agenda, these are some of the ways that actually go along with. So during the Gen Z protest, this was taken to an extreme. So where you find that maybe some politicians were actually made fun too much. Exactly. So some of the information actually was too insightful. So recently, there's this case where the president is actually responding to the online hate, where people, where the Gen Zs had put him into a casket, right? So that's one of the instances where something is taken to the extreme. Yes, you're trying to to prove a point and hold the government accountable.
Yeah.
Some things that are going on, but these are some of the extremes that should not be taken.
But just to play the devil's advocate here, don't you think we've been trying to use the most appropriate ways to kind of get his attention? But the funny thing is, I think you do tend to realize that there's a tendency of negative things being highlighted more than the positive things. Like, because I think kuongea tu yenyewe tu vile kwa ground vitu ziko, people have yani kuna vile tu utakumbuka kitu yenye ni funny ama kitu yenye na kuudhi kuliko kitu yenye tu ina make sense. So,
But Karen, let me just tell you, satire, maybe to just explain to our audience, satire, it's not something that has started with the Gen Z. Satire has been there in the previous government, in the previous leadership. It's just that times are different. Things people are facing, frustrations people are facing are different. And as you have said, maybe as a country we've reached to a point where the worst when something comes out in the worst ways, then it gets attention, which is not really where we should be as a country, because satire most of the time it's for fun. It's actually initially satire is just to have fun, not really to be a tool, a weapon. So I think with Gen Zs, they've taken satire and used it as a weapon. And as you say, the government is more powerful than we are. And why are we experiencing cases of people being abducted, of people being extrajudicial killings happening? It's because the government has the instrument. If they want to look for you, Karen, the government will look for you, find you. So remember, okay, I'm not very old, but during the Moy's regime, there was satire on newspapers, and I think it was XYZ show or something, where people would actually satirize the president. But you see, it wasn't so much for hate. They were still addressing the pertinent issues that were there, but in a way that came out like it's all fun and games, it's all fun and games, but we really mean this is happening. It's only that if you go on the offense, the government will also not sit down and just say, okay, you want to portray me in a certain way, I'll just sit down because it's your. Remember, in our constitution, everyone has a right to speech, but they say where your freedom and rights end, or where somebody else's begin is where you end. So there's this as much as we like Gen Zs push the button, but you know there's buttons we push too hard, there are retaliations to it, and we've seen this um, satire and disinformation. Satire is not always disinformation. So sometimes satire is just depicting what is there in a way that, in a different way than what is being depicted. So we do applaud Gen Zs for trying to find new ways to express expression. But then, even as a human being, there's just so much you can push out there, especially if it regards someone else's without repercussions. So I think, as Dennis has said, Gen Zs are going to the extreme. But you can go to the extremes. But also, what Gen Zs are not looking at are the repercussions, and how do we deal with the repercussions when they come, such that when the repercussions come, they find Gen Zs off guard. So I think what we've said before, or today's episode, is majorly on information. As a Gen Z, read the constitutions, know what do our laws say about depicting someone in a certain way, what do laws say about doing this and that, such that if you decide that is the way I'm going to go, then you already know the consequences and how to deal with the consequences, so that the consequences don't come as a surprise. And also, when we say about information, not just our country, globally, what happens if people do this? If it happened in a certain country and this is how the government reacted, there's a likelihood our government will take the same direction. So, what is the best way for us to deal with it? If the government decides to take this direction, how are we going to deal with it? Not wait for the government. Most governments are predictable. I mean, abductions, extrajudicial killings is not something that has started in Kenya. It has happened in countries where, when people try to talk up against the government or try to um, do something that actually depicts the government in a negative way, there are always repercussions, and these repercussions are even documented. Surprisingly, if you compare, the governments take the same direction, either do shutdowns, internet shutdowns, or the repercussions are there. They are predictable. So, for my advice to Gen Z is always weighing, if we take this direction, what is the government likely to do? What are the other people likely? What are the reactions of the other people? And then now find ways to navigate around that. It is the same as disinformation. If people are spewing out, and just sorry for this, but when people give out disinformation, we've said disinformation is intentional. They know how you react. Because if I want to take a job at Karen, or for example, Karen wants to run for a women's seat, I go online and say da 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 about Karen, which is going to taint your image and really make you lose that seat. So disinformation, somebody will sit down and study Karen and say, I'm going to say this about her because it's going to make her fall. So you see, for the person spreading disinformation, they have a game, they really have their points in order. But on the other side, how are you dealing? How are you, if it comes? So for me, I think we really concentrate on what are we doing, but we don't look at, if we do this, it's going to be received like this. If it's received like this, how do we read? Yeah.
Just to add on what Pauline said. So just to add on Pauline's point, I'd like to say that as the Gen Z, as the youth of today, I implore us to use alternative methods to actually uh, get away of talking to the government and fighting for our rights and democracy as a whole. So some of the ways, actually, one of the commendable ways that I actually liked was when the Gen Zs engaged the president on Twitter. So you remember that? So that was actually a really good way where they invited the president on the platform. It was a first for Kenya. So
Globally, I think.
globally, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was globally. I don't think there's been a
President was actually addressed
Yeah.
the citizens on X.
So we actually made history.
Yeah.
So the president accepted the call, came on Twitter, was asked some really hard questions, responded to the best he could. So that's how a democratic country should work, where the youth actually reach out to these leaders and they get a response and ask the question they deserve. So yeah.
I think my personal critical opinion is we could have asked harder questions and much more
Organized way.
yeah, in a much more organized way, in a way where we can systematically hold him accountable for what he speaks and what he says. But I think
But there are more opportunities. I mean, X is still there.
yeah,
It's not
Could call
going
another
anywhere.
session, right?
Yeah, you could always got another session. Now that it does not need financial mobilization of people. And now that it proved that it actually works, why not do another one? Why not calling for monthly meetings and now ask your questions in an organized way? I mean, not just emotional questions.
And I think not just the president.
Yeah, I mean, even ita hata minister mwambie, where is our education this way? Why is the education model changing and all that? Why not call them on a space where actually people thrive and it's not as costly? So it's a commendable way. And now that it worked, now that Gen Zs know that it works, why not use that? Just have a conversation with them, and if it's the accountability, ask them to account and give them time to actually answer, not to interject. I think, yeah.
it's very interesting, very very interesting. No comments. Watch out to Tongyo Pesi. So I think we have another person on the show today, and I'd like for him to introduce him to us and give us a bit-sized information on what he's doing in relation to what you're talking about today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to also contribute to the discussion, which I consider very pertinent, especially at this point in time. So, my name is Duncan Maigua. I work with the Constitution and Informed Education Consortium, and currently we are working on projects that revolve around empowering young people on how to combat misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. And we are telling the young people, let's wise up. Vijana tuchanuke, let's wise up. Let's be aware of some of the things that are happening within the digital space, and especially on issues around misinformation, generally what we call information disorders. That is misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and generally fake news. So that's it. That's what I can say in a nutshell.
I think it's very interesting. I'd want to know when we say young people, do we mean young, 35, young, 16, 17?
What is young?
Young is relative.
All right, we've been really targeting, not young at heart, targeting ages between 18 and 35. And it's people whom we perceive to have access to digital, to gadgets that can access the digital space, like the social media. When it comes to news outlets or sources of information, they can access the RSS feed, that the e-news. Yes, and generally, even just being able to run their stuff online, including job applications, because disinformation also comes in that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Being that this is your staff, when you're mkubwa hapa sasa. Exactly. So kumaanisha hii ni stuff yenye like you have been working on for quite some time. Before you actually joined us, we were talking about everything misinformation and this, as you were saying, and Mal. So we'd want for you to give us practical strategies that you can deploy to identify what mis and disinformation looks like across social platforms, and how you're able to fact check that and make sure it's ideal.
All right. I think it's first very much important for me to state that when you talk about mis and disinformation, it's an issue revolving around simply information generally, and the complexities around information dissemination are so grave, and sometimes there isn't what we call cast and stone way to identify, because they come in different forms, and therefore we employ different methods. But let me just say this, that just to put some importance on the importance of this discussion, actually, even for the people who are watching this, to understand that one, when you talk about mis and disinformation, it's an economy. There are gainers and there are losers. And the big question is, are you gaining or are you losing? Because whenever we have people trying to push narratives, trying to push stories in different and in all manner of ways to skew perceptions and all that manner of stuff, someone is gaining from it and someone is losing from it. And most likely our young people lose and lose and lose and lose. The second thing is, which I would also think, so that now I can get into your question, I can deep dive into your question, is most of the time we need to understand, because I think it's quite rampant when you talk about misinformation, what we call selective dissemination of information, where we have media or information sources, just your source out there, the source that you access information, whether government, whether your organization, whether that very online source of information that you consider as a trustworthy source. Sometimes we have them doing what we call selective dissemination, giving information in part. We also now have, again, on issues we talk about imposter content. I think that is also rampant, where we have people, individuals, or organizations, especially individuals, using logos, colors of trusted news sources or information sources to spread fake news. It's really a big thing. So sometimes it comes in form of imposter content. Sometimes it comes of in form of deep fakes. Sometimes it's just simply skewed information. It's just selective kind of information, simply to give you only a one side of a story. Yes. So what happens is that most of the time, when we keep telling people, and this is what we telling young people, anytime you see information that elicits emotions of shock, emotions of joy, anger, unasikia ni kama unaweza enda kama umeingia State House saa sita ya usiku. You know, sometimes extreme excitement, you need to stop. Hey, stop. Hey, stop. Whenever you see a headline that is shouting, you need to ask, you don't yell at me. I read the story if I want to read the story. Don't yell at me. Then when you realize that this is really making you feel quite emotionally, triggered, you need to stop. Stop. Don't share. Don't even be quick to share. Stop. Then once you stop, reflect, ask yourself, how about if this information could be this way? What if it would be the other way? Okay, just be skeptical. Be skeptical. We tell people be skeptical at that point when you are reflecting. Be very skeptical. And then from then what you're supposed to do is verify. Look for this information and be sure whether this information it's also maybe perhaps published by other news sources, for instance. Has it been published by other news sources? If it's coming from a specific directorate or government institution, go to their website, go to their socials, check, is it there? Is it true it's them who have released it? But nowadays, sometimes they also put confidential, so that they put a stamp here, confidential, so that it tells you cannot find it. You cannot find it. They'll tell you that this is information that has been, I don't know how I'm forgetting the term, but this is information that is so secret, it's secret. In fact, not supposed to be disclosed. In fact, it was disclosed
by mistake. And I think just sorry for interrupting you, Dan, but I think even during elections, that is what we come across. Everybody, because they know people will go and verify, they just tamper verified or they'll stamp it confidential. But now those are the things you're supposed to be very skeptical about. Because, for example, if it's information from a ministry, if you go to the website, there is, even if it's not today's information, you'll see prior hints to this conversation. If it's something from the government that elicits emotions, it must have been hinted before. Politicians are not the quiet kind of people. So this is something that has been hinted here and there. Somebody says this, the other politician disputes it. And then when it comes as a directive, then you're like, okay,
this has been a conversation for quite a while. But if something comes out of the blue and it just makes you want to act in certain ways, that is the main that is what disinformation is meant for. It's for you to react. So if you feel like you have to react, just as you said, stop, go somewhere else, look for the same information. Most of the time to know it's disinformation, you barely find it discussed anywhere else, or you'll go somewhere else and people will say, no, this is not the right information, it's wrong. So yeah.
I think just to put my random thoughts out there, vile mlikuwa mnaongelea hiyo stamp ya confidential, is it the same way we identify when it is like a free holiday, a public holiday, and it had not been like notarized by the government, where now they had spoken about it, let's say for instance on Citizen, but so now we see the document,
It's official.
so that's the standard, almost like close to the standard procedure we should follow when you're fact-checking information.
Yes, I think it's very important. Sorry, but let me just chime in again to understand also the style of different forms of communication coming from different organizations. For instance, it's very interesting because I noticed that some of the press releases given by the embassy, the US embassy, you find most of the time they don't have places down there where you've signed or something.
Yeah.
A very plain, very plain and
plain,
simple
no
document.
signatures.
And there are people who again take advantage of
Yeah.
that. So it's very important for you to stop, reflect, and then you can verify. And sometimes in terms of verification, there are even source, I think sites where you can verify Kina Africa Chair, Kina Reuters, Fact Check. Yes, very many sources. But remember, not every information you get there. There are specific sites that you find for them. They only deal with politics. Yes, you'll find some of them only deal with politics. There are some that deal with politics in US, so you will not apply that in Kenya. But again, imagine mis and disinformation revolving around a specific constituency. Sometimes it's, it's very
Maybe
important.
local.
Yes. But again, it's also, very important to note that we also now have another danger where we have people whom I would call because government and specific, there are people who are very powerful even in different positions in government and different social setups who are propaganda machines. They generate a lot of information and mostly disinformation. And we find that most of the time, especially if they're employed by government, most of the time when true information has been published out there by trusted sources, they also pick it and Google it fake.
Yeah.
So that's why we are talking
that's
about
propaganda.
yes. That's why we are talking about verification. Verify. Take your time. Don't be quick to spread. Take your time.
Yeah.
Because what has happened with the digital spaces and social media is what we call information decentralization. We no longer have what we used to. Personally, I've done communication in school, and one of the things that we used to be taught is that one of the role of the media we used to say it's a watchdog, the information gatekeeper. But nowadays it's no longer information gatekeeper. We no longer have kids. It's already
an open
decentralized.
field.
Yes. The information is we can use in the Kenyan language. It's already devolved.
Yeah.
Anyone has the right and the capacity to spread information across different platforms. So it's very important because if we do not look at some of these things, they are going to affect even how we practice our democratic processes. And especially malinformation affects democratic processes, especially elections, especially for women who are seeking elective positions. They get a lot of issues to do with malinformation spread there. Okay, some of them are true. Malinformation sometimes it could be true. For instance, someone is found in a compromising situation, it could be true. But
then using it as a weapon
yes,
against them.
Yes, and do I need to know that he or she was in that specific position? So that really affects very many people, and not only women, even men. There's one presidential candidate who had left a very senior job in one of these multinational United Nations But there is one video that spread so quick, malinformation. But I think it was computer manipulated, and then very he actually stopped. He did it even by we no longer hear from him. Quite unfortunate.
Yeah. I think just to ask kind of the last question, I'd want to know, do you then, like, what are your thoughts on this? Do you then think that we should have policies, laws, or an institution that mans the digital space to say that this is too much and this is too little? Because, as you have said, with the coming of the digital space, then everyone can be a blogger. Unaweza amka uamue you wanna be a blogger. Mi naweza amka pia mimi
Na
niseme
kamera
hivyo.
na
Exactly. So, do you think there's need for that?
I wouldn't say really particularly that there is need for that for us to do that, because it's a very delicate balance. What we call the balancing act between one. If we are talking about regulation, we are talking about also giving space for abuse, because there are people, especially governments, that sometimes would curtail the freedom of speech in the name of regulation, and even prevent people from accessing information in the name of regulation. All right. So that is one. Then, secondly, it's very difficult sometimes because of the ability, the capacity of social media and digital spaces to allow anonymity. Yes. So it's very hard sometimes to even track some of these people. So, and that is why actually in what we've been doing as an organization, we've really been pushing for what we call self-regulation. Sensitize young people, sensitize social media users on how they can self-regulate and how they can also enhance digital hygiene, because it's not easy. It's not easy, really, even to regulate the space. The kind of emerging technologies, the kind of speed that things are developing and evolving within the space, it's very hard. And even if we are going to amend some of these laws, for instance, the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act, there are also provisions within the Elections Act, it's still not enough. That's why we have, you can never address mis and disinformation using laws. It's very difficult. So what we are doing is really to talk even to our viewers that they can be ambassadors, and they can be ambassadors for digital hygiene to ensure that these information disorders do not spread in their hands.
Thank you very much. I think that was really insightful. And in note of those good statements, I'd like to hear parting shots from you in half a minute. Unaweza?
Maybe we can start with the done and then we can.
Let's look for the parting shot.
Pleasure is all mine. So just say that let us champion for proper use of online spaces, and also proper use of online spaces is not about just combating disinformation and fake news, but also utilizing the capacity that these spaces have to change this country. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
My parting shot is the social media landscape is just the normal society. In a normal society, we didn't have written rules, written regulations about, but people knew doing the wrong thing is just a wrong thing. So just self-regulation is so important, but let's go back to humanity, just being humans and not typing fingers behind a keyboard. Let's just go back to our humanity. That's all I'd like to say.
Okay.
So for me, I'd like to say that as citizens of Kenya, we should be careful and also accountable for the information we share there. Especially during this time, in this digital age where actually there's the emergence of AI, where there's AI generated images and deepfakes, which looks so real that you can actually even tell the difference between real images and AI generated. So So we need to reflect on what the kind of content we are sharing out there and be accountable.
Thank you very much, Imran. And I think there's this very simple and realistic quote that I like that says that change starts with you. In light of everything that I've had, I think as much as we do want to have regulations and policies, one of the biggest things that I've had, especially when it comes to combating and taking it as a strategy on mis and disinformation, is self-regulation. So I think it's really important that as citizenry, me, you know, as a person, like we really take it into our hands to learn and to educate and just to take our time to even fact check and just basically inform ourselves in order to fight this disinformation and malinformation in an information landscape where we have access to everything, because internet makes the world a global village.
Yeah.
So it's been a pleasure hosting my people.
It's been a pleasure coming here.
Yes, and as we wrap up, I'd like to invite all of you to go and check on our social media pages on Linktree, Elog Kenya, and on Twitter, Elog Kenya. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.